From the heart of South Asia to the crossroads of Central Asia, from the turbulent Middle East and North Africa to the power corridors of the West, where narratives collide, perspectives matter and stories connect. This is Beyond Borders and I am Umar Khalid. But during the course of the show, we are going to bring you stories from across the world in a world that we consider without borders or boundaries, and discuss stories that are extremely pertinent in this changing 21st century. We'll begin with the top stories of the day, or in our words, region lines. The Trump administration has informed lawmakers about shutting down several overseas offices of the Voice of America. This decision comes amid growing criticism against the media outlets' editorial decisions. Moving on, 5 hours long talks between Russian President Vladimir Putin and US envoy Witkoff end without a breakthrough on ending the Ukraine war, with the Kremlin saying no compromise has been reached on the crucial issue of the control of Ukrainian territory. Meanwhile, the Trump administration also says that it has paused all immigration applications, including green card and US citizenship processing, filed by immigrants from 19 non-European countries, citing concerns over national security and public safety. And lastly, the Israeli army kills 5 Palestinians, including a journalist and a child, and wounds dozens more across Gaza in the latest violations of the US brokered ceasefire agreement. According to the Gaza's health ministry, Israeli forces have killed 357 Palestinians in the 50 days of ceasefire in Gaza. We'll begin with South Asia and the closure of the Voice of America channels in this region and in other places. For years, Islamabad had highlighted the fact that US-funded services like VOA Urdu, VOA Diva, VOA Ashna, VOA Pashto and Radio Mashal, as well as Radio Azadi, were acting as soft power tools against Pakistan's security apparatus and territorial integrity. Trump's move to shut down VOA's overseas bureaus and long-range radio stations effectively chokes the very ecosystem that has carried these narratives, meaning that the era of organized anti-Pakistan propaganda beamed from these platforms may be ending not in Islamabad but in Washington itself. The propagation of this artificial fault lines against Pakistan that led to the increase in insurgency and ethnic division in the country can finally come to an end. We've been joined by different guests to discuss more on this. Sumaira Khan, who's a leading journalist, joins us online. So does Muhammad Umar, who's a security analyst, who joins us all the way from the US. Umar, thank you very much to have joined us. Umar, I'd like to understand something that is important from this decision of the closure of the VOA's overseas offices and radio transmitters, especially for countries such as Pakistan, where services such as VOA Urdu, VOA Diva, VOA Ashna, Radio Azadi, Radio Mashal had become central tools of propaganda against Pakistan. How do you view this decision under these parameters?
Umar, as a Pakistani American who's watched this issue for years, President Trump's decision makes sense. For a long time, Pakistan has felt that Voice of America's overseas offices, and by the way, Islamabad was one of 6 offices that President Trump notified VOA this morning that he was going to close, as reported by the New York Times. But specifically, the Islamabad Bureau were not giving fair or balanced coverage, as you pointed out in your opening monologue. When taxpayer-funded media repeatedly reinforces narratives that Pakistanis see as biased, it damages trust between the two nations. Closing these bureaus resets the relationship, and it removes long-standing irritant and sends a message that the US funding should not be used to influence domestic debates inside other countries. It's a responsible correction, and it's not a confrontation.
All right, Umar, also I'd like to understand the closure of all these channels that I've just cited to you, VOA Urdu, Diva, Mashal, similar outlets were amplifying anti-Pakistan narratives, and that is what Pakistan had highlighted many a times in the past as well. With Washington now dismantling the very infrastructure that sustained these very channels, do you feel that this move also somehow vindicates Pakistan's long-standing concerns?
I absolutely think it does. You're going to have people that may agree or may not agree, but the perception existed. Pakistan saw certain reporting as one-sided and lacking local context. That perception alone was enough to weaken the trust between the two nations, and closing these bureaus, closing these offices in Islamabad removes that consistent point of friction. And it also vindicates Pakistan that we did see propaganda coming out of American tax-funded media, the VOA offices in Islamabad.
All right, Umar, let's take also the example of Mashal radio that had framed Pakistan through unlawful, illegal allegations about militancy, instability, regional disruption of Pakistan. That was all more or less based on falsehoods. To what extent, in your point of view, the closure of, amongst others, Mashal radio could also be viewed as the end of a coordinated information campaign that was designed to erode public trust in the Pakistani state?
Absolutely, Umar. For years, that reporting on the radio felt more like political pressure than journalism. And as a U.S. taxpayer myself, I'm relieved that these narratives are no longer going to be funded, and they're no longer going to undermine Pakistan. They're no longer going to undermine the Pakistan-U.S. relationship. And shutting down that operation was not just only justified, but it was absolutely necessary. At the end of the day, as a Pakistani American, again, if the US government media outlet loses trust of the very people it claims to inform in Pakistan, then fixing that problem is in everyone's interest. President Trump's decision does exactly that.
All right. Umar, also, do you expect that the closure of these offices in Islamabad and related regional operations will reduce the volume of externally driven anti-Pakistan propaganda, or do you feel that other channels from Afghanistan, from India will take their place?
Umar, you know this better than anyone else, having just gone through a rebuild or just having introduced Pakistan Digital, that the traditional media outlets, radio, television, satellite television, and print are no longer considered the tools of influence that they were in the past. In this digital landscape, like you just pointed out, we've seen accounts on Twitter, on Facebook, Instagram, Thread, name social media, and you've seen how not just the Afghan lobby, but the Indian lobby, the Israeli lobby, all enemies of Pakistan have used these digital platforms to cause damage within Pakistan and continue to create divisions based on ethnicities, religion, and language within the country, which is not good in our national interest. And I know that this is welcoming news, but there's still a lot of work to be done to counter those digital domains.
Umar, from a public or a Pakistani diplomacy point of view, do you feel that the closure of these channels can now be leveraged by Islamabad for a more balanced narrative when it comes to Pakistan and Pakistani interests?
Absolutely. And I think a lot of credit has to be given to President Trump and this current administration, because they saw that their US tax money was being spent to undermine the relationship of a partner, of a trusted ally. And he took the actions, his administration took the action to correct that course. And this will definitely improve relations between Pakistan and the United States. And we can see more balanced reporting coming from American media outlets that are not funded by the American taxpayer, that are private and objective and do not have a bias of any specific state. So definitely improvement.
All right, you must stay online with us. Sumaira Khan, leading journalist, also joins us. Sumaira, thank you very much to have joined us. Sumaira, I'd like to understand the closure of these channels of the VOA and Mashal Radio as well. If I were to ask you, do you feel that this decision of their closure ends a chapter in which all of these channels were waging a psychological and information campaign against Pakistan?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Umar, for inviting me to join you in this program. And first of all, I just could hear the last part of my colleague who was speaking about it. There are two ways to understand this issue. If, as a Pakistani, I look at the entire coverage and reportage of
All right, so we were talking to Sumaira, some kind of a technical glitch. We'll revert to Umar and we'll ask him the same question, then we'll go back to Sumaira. Do you feel, Umar, this ends a chapter as far as the anti-Pakistan psychological information warfare is concerned with the closure of all of these channels?
Yes, Umar, it removes the friction point. Washington and Islamabad can now engage in government to government without the background noise of media controversies coming out of these news outlets that were closed in Islamabad. So yes, absolutely, it improves the relationship and removes that friction.
As somebody who understands the security paradigms and who understands information and the flow of information as well, what do you feel should be the steps that Pakistan should now take to ensure that no similar kind of externally funded media architecture could be weaponized against its own sovereignty?
So, Umar, in addition to VOA, there are still many others operating within Pakistan, especially on digital platforms. So Pakistan must, first of all, stay vigilant. It must continue to gather evidence. It must continue to voice its concerns to governments where it perceives the biased or politically intrusive messaging is coming from. So we must continue to do that. Other things we can do is we can also improve our own soft power by opening up digital channels to other countries. We need to show what Pakistan is truly about. Back many, many years ago, when I taught at the National University of Sciences and Technology in NUST in Islamabad, I taught mass communications. Media was one of my subjects. And one of the things that I always encouraged students to do was use their cell phones, take their cell phones out, make videos, be active on social media, show them the reality of Pakistan to counter these narratives. So I think as we need to continue investing that, the state doesn't have to do anything. It's the citizens of Pakistan that have to take the next steps to show the world what Pakistan is really about.
All right, Umar, that was an interesting perspective as far as your point of view is concerned. Sumaira Khan finally joins us online. Sumaira, I was talking to you about the closure of these channels, VoA's, VOA Urdu, VOA Diva, VOA Ashna, VOA Radio Azadi and Radio Mashal. How do you see that as maybe the end of a chapter of information disinformation rather against Pakistan, against Pakistani interests, against Pakistani sovereignty? Do you feel we are moving towards the right direction with the closure of these channels?
Thank you, Umar. I'm sorry. I think there is some problem of disconnection and the communication as well because I'm traveling. So we are speaking through our transits. So I was talking about earlier that with the closure of all these channels, the channel you were specifically talking about, we have always seen, or most of the time, we have witnessed quite negative, substance on their websites, and they were conducting from nooks and corners of Pakistan, and we used to come across such statements of their own stingers and their representatives and representatives and their journalists who are working with them. They used to tell us in their conversations that, see, we get a catch line from Washington, D.C. to do a specific story on this. And it was not just Voice of America. The other channels are also I'm talking about. I'm about, I'm giving a blanket statement for most of them. So if having a job is a perk for them. If they don't agree with the manager or the editor or the executive editor, obviously their job is at stake and at red line. So they were bound to do it. But after some time, I felt that our colleagues who are covering from bordering areas, be it Balochistan or Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, they were in sort of a habit to search for something negative, against the security and armed forces of Pakistan. So this was a pattern that I used to feel that all these channels are specifically working on a theme that is very visible to every Pakistani, every common Pakistani. But they used to use those stories against the law enforcement agency. They might be true. They might be, genuinely speaking about some concerns, addressing concerns. But majority of the times, trust me, they looked biased to me, specifically in the matter of Pashtun Tahaffuz movement and Maharang Baloch and others. But they never worked on things that are actually they were actually a point of concern for rest of Pakistanis. If there is a there are lengthy hours of load shedding of gas and electricity, they wouldn't cover it. If a person who was got what do we call it? I don't want to use those harsh words, but if a person is genuinely facing a problem in Pakistan due to some issue that Sumaira thinks and Umar thinks, yes, we should talk about it, they won't talk about it, but they would be rather concerned about Maharang Baloch and Manzoor Pashteen and the others, and taking special permissions to interview them, taking, playing hide and seek in the province of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. If you are not allowed to go from one way, they would opt for another way, a difficult tribal belt to reach Manzoor Pashteen just to interview them, but they would not try to reach masses, those who are actually those who are actually thinking that yes, military and the security personnel did not do anything wrong in the area that you are talking about. But journalism has their own phases. With disclosure, um, I might be the most neutral person in this regard, but what President Trump said, and my colleague he was earlier maintaining his opinion, I think it was. Trust me, don't take me wrong, but in some point, in somehow or the other, it benefited the bilateral relation of USA and Pakistan, and there is minimum fake news and minimum propaganda news, I must say.
But Sumaira, when you look at this whole information warfare that Pakistan has been a victim of since such a long time, we've seen the disinformation campaign that began by India and so many other campaigns, and India has done that. Now also Afghanistan, unfortunately, the Afghan Taliban government or those operating from Afghanistan are engaging in this pattern of deliberately maligning Pakistan, Pakistani interests, and the basic core sovereignty of Pakistan. What was the end game, and do you feel by the closure of these channels, this end game to some extent has been cut or cut at its nib, or maybe fractured to some extent?
As I told you, there are different phases of journalism. Maybe if they were conducting a genuine, a balanced journalism from Pakistan, nobody would be bothered. We come across many stories. BBC is doing, Develay is doing. They actually fund their journalists, their reporters to go and do good stories as well. If they are doing some negativity, but they are doing good stories as well. But as I told you that outlets like Voice of America and Radio Liberty and others, you can still go and check their websites. Earlier, they were banned in Pakistan, if you remember, some 8 to 10 years ago. They were touching skies of fake news and propaganda, and they used to run all the timelines and checks of if something happens in Pakistan, and if, God forbid, there is a huge tragedy, but if they saw that yes, we can play around the reasons, and the reason would only be they would be only interested in a story if they get some security lapse in an incident and in a tragedy. For example, if you go and see the coverage regarding Army Public School, by the way, we have just a few days left for another anniversary of Army Public School, 16th December 2014. My heart sinks when I think about it. And trust me, I saw a lot of stories. I don't want to go into details of that heinous crime happened in the history of Pakistan and the tragedy. But I was totally speechless at the mindlessness and the heartlessness of the conduct of that editorial judgment. So if you look at those factors, Umar, obviously I'll be very happy that a door has been shut to the sort of substance that was
a door has indeed been shut.
Face and
a door indeed has been shut, and you rightly pointed that out. Yes, Sumaira, you were saying?
Yeah, I'm facing some disruption in your voice as well, probably.
So I was just saying that I totally agree with you on a door shut means a door for the better opens as far as not only information technology is concerned, information is concerned, but ethical principles are concerned when it comes to any kind of reporting. I totally agree with you on that you can report on anything, but you need to be ethical as far as the principles that you adhere to as journalists, and you need to talk about things that matter, but do not fabricate stories and do not malign Pakistan. And that is what had been happening. And maybe this door shut, as you yourself pointed out, will pave towards some kind of positivity as far as all of this disinformation that has been traveling against Pakistan is concerned. Thank you very much, Sumaira, to have joined us, and thank you very much to have borne with us despite all of this technical glitches that are being experienced. Umar, coming to you. Ethical journalism, do you feel people still in the West hold some kind of thought towards it, or some kind of they still adhere to those principles? And do you feel that now in this day of information warfare, the whole world needs to be extremely cognizant and aware of what is ethical and what is fabricated?
Absolutely, Umar. It's an essential point in the US also. There's a lot of disinformation. You've heard the current American president, President Trump, constantly call out the fake news and the fake news networks. His administration has taken even private news channels to court, challenging them on their reporting style, and the bias in the way they present the news, and he has successfully won. So this is a really important issue, both domestically and obviously. Again, when this administration sees American taxpayer money being funded to undermine relationships with a partner and ally like Pakistan, it's a course correction that was long overdue. And
of course, I understand, Umar, where you're coming from as well, and under the current perspectives, I agree with Sumaira when she says that she feels that finally a door has been shut for good, and that boards in favor of Pakistan. But the fact remains at the end of the day that as journalists, whether it be myself, Sumaira, or others, and even Umar, who is associated directly or indirectly as far as journalism is concerned, you need to be ethical as far as whatever you report and whenever you report and whosoever you report on. You need to highlight both sides of the story, and you need to come up with constructive journalism and not destructive journalism and involve yourself in disinformation, something that India has mastered, unfortunately, and something that we see some of the channels that emanate from the Afghan territories now getting involved with them. But as we say, this end is is the right end and maybe the beginning of a constructive relationship, not only as far as information is concerned, but also a path towards right dissemination of information when it comes to Pakistan. Let's see what the coming weeks have in store as far as such avenues are concerned that have now been closed. Let's now take you to the West. All right, and continuing, of course, we were talking about the West. We'll continue our second story on the West as well, which concerns the deal between, the peace deal or the ceasefire agreement between Russia and Ukraine. The US seemed very optimistic that they will come to some kind of a conclusion. There was a meeting, a long-term meeting that was around 5 hours of meeting that was held between President Vladimir Putin and US envoys Steve Witkoff as well as Jared Kushner, which ended without any kind of a compromise on a Russia-Ukraine peace deal. Both sides have described this discussion as constructive, but a lot of people say that major gaps remain, especially on territorial issues. Russia is rejecting several US proposals and insists on its claims over the Donbas region. A fragile diplomatic pathway is ahead, but what will happen is anybody's guess. Let's see how things will move along, whether it be the Ukrainian point of view or the European point of view or the Russian or the US point of view. We've been joined by two guests. We continue to be joined by Mohammed Umar all the way from the US, but we've also been joined by Arnaud Develay, who's a political consultant who joins us from Moscow. Let's begin with you, Arnaud. I'd like to understand, despite these 5 hours of negotiations between the Russian and the US side, no compromise was reached, although there was a lot of enthusiasm before these talks were held. Do you feel this means to say that there's some kind of a fundamental disagreement between both the Russian and the US side on certain important points, which makes this peace deal increasingly remote?
Well, to be sure, I don't think there's fundamental disagreement on the willingness to put an end to the bloodshed. The question remains now under what terms and in what circumstances. As we speak, the Russian armed forces are now steamrolling westward, and so the goalpost is increasingly being shifted westward. So the question is now whether or not the Trump administration, and it's important to mention that the two individuals who were in Moscow last night were not cabinet members. They were never confirmed by the Senate. They are essentially family members and business associates of Donald Trump, which means he does not even trust the people within his own cabinet, i.e. Marco Rubio, who is an arch neocon. So Ushakov, who's the point man of Vladimir Putin on the issue, lamented a few days ago that the negotiation or the discussions were replete with leaks, as related by Bloomberg. So it's difficult in those conditions to try to make sure that there are meetings of the mind when every time a leak gets to be revealed, we find out the Europeans are basically harpooning upon it, trying to make sure they can exploit the situation and essentially put obstacle into the process. So right now the premium is to try to, as they called it themselves, conduct closed format negotiation. But there are a lot of questions to go through, technical issues, but as you mentioned yourself, fundamental issues involving concession of territorial parts of Ukraine, as well as the NATO membership issue. So we shall try to see what happens in the coming weeks. For now, the two individuals mentioned earlier are back in Washington. They will not make any statements. Ushakov himself and Peskov repeated that there's nothing official and to be mentioned. So they're keeping their cards close to the vest, going back to DC to report to Donald Trump, and we'll see where that takes us. But right now, it's anybody's guess as to the intricacies of what's being discussed and whether or not there are specific advancement and progress.
All right, Arnaud, also I'd like to understand, Zelensky says that he is, in fact, he is warning against any deals behind Ukraine's back. Do you feel, despite the initial warming up as far as Ukraine was concerned on the deal that Donald Trump was proposing to end this war or conflict between Russia and Ukraine, now some kind of a new freeze has happened? And what should be done, what could be done to unfreeze this momentum that had started some time back, and we thought that some kind of a breakthrough might happen in these talks?
Well, let's make a few things clear to begin with. Zelensky is not the legitimate president of Ukraine, not anymore. So going back to May 2024, and in spite of the constitutional provisions calling for the Rada to appoint the president of the Rada as the interim president, he has no legitimacy whatsoever to negotiate on behalf of the Ukrainian people. So that's number one. Number two, to the extent the perception might have been that he was receptive to the 28-point so-called peace plan put forward by Donald Trump, this was quickly belied by Yermak, Zelensky's gray eminence, or the chief of staff, who basically said there's no way that Ukraine would agree on any, and I mean any, notion of territorial concessions. A week later, we find out that this same Yermak is now under investigation for aggravated graft. So we somewhat now get the idea that there are a lot of obstructions coming from Kiev, but not only from Kiev, also from Europe, and the succession of corruption scandals the last couple of weeks, including last night revelation that Federica Mogherini and a couple of other EU officials have been placed under arrest, at least for interrogation. We will, find out more about the specificities of those accusations. But I would not be surprised if it dealt with Ukraine, to be sure. So it seems as if the FBI, the Department of Defense, should I say the Department of War now, and some key officials within the Trump administration are trying to put the pressure on the Kiev regime and on the European Union to, at the very least, tone it down a little and show constructive spirit. Donald Trump is facing extremely difficult midterm deadline. It looks as if the polls are revealing that he will lose both houses of Congress. So he needs some political victories, and the Ukraine theater might be just what he needs. But it takes a lot of time. Those are very complicated issues, long-standing ones. And Russia's willingness and insistence on addressing root causes make it that the process will take some time until every major point at the very least is ironed out to the satisfaction of both sides.
All right, Arnaud, please stay on with us. Umar, I'd like to understand, the European Union has had serious reservations on these talks, and now it has also serious reservations on the draft that they have seen or has been leaked as far as the US proposals are concerned. I mean, do you feel this proposal is going to further create rifts between the EU and the US, or do you feel some kind of a compromise will be reached sometime in the near future?
Umar, I'm very hopeful that a compromise will be reached sometime in the near future. The fact of the matter is Ukraine cannot continue without American support. And the US support is not going to last forever. President Trump has been very, very clear since he took office that he is not willing to continue to fund endless wars anywhere around the world, especially with US taxpayer money. So whether or not as my colleague just said, this is going to be a long process. It's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen quickly. But what we're seeing right now is something we haven't seen for a very long time, which is that the U.S. is finally leading big power diplomacy again. And as you mentioned in your monologue, it wasn't just a half an hour meeting or a friendly handshake. This was a serious 5-hour high-level negotiation. Yes, no one gave anything away, but the fact that Russia acknowledged parts of the American plan means that we finally have some progress and some movement forward.
All right. Speaking of forward movement, I'd also like to understand from Arnaud Develay. Arnaud, when it comes to willingness, how willing, in your point of view, is Russia to this current form of ceasefire agreement between Russia and Ukraine? And how willing is it to go these 2 steps forward or not as far as the future of this conflict is concerned?
Well, let's be clear, there's no incentive for Russia to settle on the ceasefire. Russia wants a comprehensive document that addresses, again, all the root causes of the conflict. If it's to have a ceasefire for the sake of a ceasefire, which would allow the Ukrainian proxy to regroup and rearm and perpetuate the loss of life, there's no point for Russia to do that. So this is the reason why, despite the fact that the 2 sides have been speaking extensively, 5 hours, as you mentioned, the Russian armed forces are proceeding apace, and it's exponentially, geometrically rate of increase as far as the speed of the progression. But Russia is at the same time not unreasonable. It just wants its own security concerns to be taken into account. And so a ceasefire in that sense is too little, too late, should I say.
All right. Last question as far as you are concerned, Arnaud, as far as this very topic is concerned. When Moscow had certain disagreement with certain US proposals and called them unacceptable, do you feel, what kind of diplomatic mechanisms do you feel are needed to take this whole agreement process forward in a way that could lead to tangible results? What's your take on that?
Well, we all understand that Ukraine is a proxy of the collective West, so it has no mind of its own. It's an object, not a subject. The decision-making and the political muscle is in Washington. So in that sense, it's only logical for Moscow we deal with Washington. But again, there are a lot of pressure on the administration, a lot of conflicting factions. dragging their feet, trying to save time until in the first, initially we can say the midterm election, because once the two houses of Congress are taken away from the Trump administration, it will be more difficult to have any kind of peace deal being approved by the House. That's the first thing. So we have to be extremely cautious and take into account also the political calendar of US politics. As far as the negotiating process itself is concerned, I think discretion and restraint on what might have been spoken about is essential. And we should see more and more of those extensive working sessions, because again, this is a very Gordian knot-like situation. Never had to be that way, but it evolved into such a situation that now, you cannot just do it over half an hour tea session. It requires a lot of brainstorming, creative ideas, a lot of recommendation bearing on verification process on the ground, but also recognition of certain new realities on the ground in international treaties. And so, yes, it requires a lot of concentration on issues that are not untractable, but that will require a serious and comprehensive approach.
All right, a serious and comprehensive approach is what is needed to move the way forward, to pave the way forward. And of course, the road might be a bit tricky, but the road is there as far as the future of a peace deal between Russia and Ukraine is concerned. Thank you very much, Arnaud Develay, to have joined us all the way from Moscow and to have given us your eminent point of view. Let's now take you to the last story as far as the West is concerned, and that regards to the United States that has paused all kinds of immigration applications from 19 different countries across the world, all pending green card and citizenship applications from immigrants belonging to 19 non-European countries, citing heightened national security and public safety concern has now been implemented. These are the same countries that have faced partial or full travel bans in June, with the latest action imposing even stricter restrictions, reflecting President Donald Trump's intensified focus on immigration control as well. The targeted countries include Afghanistan, Somalia, Iran, Yemen, Libya, Sudan, Eritrea, Haiti, and other previously subject to severe or partial entry suspensions. The memorandum also mandates that immigrants from these 19 states undergo a thorough re-review, including possible additional interviews, before their applications could proceed further. Now let's take you to the Middle East and North Africa. Now, as far as the Middle East is concerned, the leading story always remains Gaza. It will continue to be, because the fact remains that despite an agreement that was signed by Israel itself, Israel continues to flout that very ceasefire agreement. The atrocities continue on the people in Gaza. The number of people that are devoid proper food, health facilities and water still remains. The hospitals are almost completely damaged. The aid is not entering Gaza as it should be, as had been agreed upon by Israel. The number of people that are continue to be killed in the Gaza, as well as those who are arrested, killed, injured in West Bank continues. The intention for Israel to occupy the already occupied West Bank continues to become more and more apparent. And of course, 70,117 people have so far been butchered officially, to let you know, since this whole conflict began in October of 2023. 170,000, almost 71,000 people have been injured since the very October. This October 2025 ceasefire was meant to halt Israel's war on Gaza, but 2 months later, Israel violates the agreement over 500 times, killing at least 356 Palestinians. And this pace of killing might have slowed down because of a ceasefire agreement, but the war has never truly stopped. We continue to be joined by Mohammed Umar, who is our leading analyst, joining us all the way from the US. Thank you, Umar, to be so patient and remain with us during the entirety of the show. Israel violates the ceasefire agreement more than 500 times. The number of people killed is quite evident since the ceasefire agreement had been signed. Do you feel that the ceasefire agreement, from Israel's perspective, was never meant to stop the war, but rather to manage international optics?
Absolutely, Umar. I am now referring to this ceasefire as the illusion of a ceasefire. The situation in Gaza is not ambiguous. The information is available, the violations are documented, and the humanitarian costs are visible to the world. What is missing, as you pointed out, is the political will to respond. Governments have access to real-time reporting from their own agencies. They continue to frame this period as a functioning ceasefire, despite the evidence that contradicts their public statements. If the international community continues to prioritize diplomatic comfort over accountability, then the principles it claims to defend will remain largely theoretical. Gaza is the living consequences of the gap every day, and the responsibility for narrowing it lies with those who have chosen not to confront the facts or obligations that they routinely demand of others at the United Nations, at other international forums, and in their own capitals around the world.
Umar, you know, when you look at all that has been happening since the ceasefire was signed between Israel and, of course, the Palestinian faction, and the fact remains that Israel continues to flout it. I've just told you the number of times as well. Do you agree with the fact that Israel continues to pursue its genocidal objectives? And what can be done to stop these objectives once and for all, or should or could something be done?
Absolutely, Umar. I think we saw some real progress leading up to now what I call the illusion of the ceasefire, that agreement. We need a united front again. What happened was, with the talks of a ceasefire, with the document being signed, with representatives from the Arab world meeting with representatives of Israel, the world kind of lifted their foot off the throttle. We should have never done that. I think if we can get our foot back on the throttle, be a united voice, put pressure back on the United States to hold Israel accountable, I think we do have allies in Washington, D.C., including starting with President Trump, who, as I mentioned previously last week, said he will not allow Israel to annex the West Bank. So I think what we need to do is get back to where we were prior to this so-called ceasefire being signed, put the pressure back on the U.S., put the diplomatic pressure back on Israel, and we're going to start seeing results, and hopefully Israel being held accountable for their actions.
All right. Amnesty International warns, as so many other international NGOs have also warned, that famine, aid obstruction, displacement are deliberate policies from the Israeli government that continue to be pursued despite the agreement made and signed by Israel. How does this fit into the broader patterns of ethnic cleansing or demographic engineering that continues in Gaza?
Umar, this is Zionism. The world has to tackle Zionism. They have already laid out their plans. They don't plan to stop at the West Bank. They plan to continue into other parts of the Middle East. You've seen attacks in Syria, in Libya, in Lebanon. No one in the Middle East is safe. The genocidal plans have been clearly laid out in their political ideology, which is Zionism. So there is no arguing that what Israel is doing, it is ethnic cleansing. What they are doing is committing genocide. And we've never seen genocide at this scale in all of human history. So this is absolutely, it goes with their political ideology of Zionism. And other than us trying to shine the light on that topic and get international pressure back on Israel, start boycotting, don't let Israel sports participate in international sporting events. Do not let diplomats enter your country from Israel. And that's when we're going to start seeing maybe some relief for the people in Palestine, in Gaza, and the larger Middle East.
Thank you very much, Umar, to have joined us all the way from the US and to have joined us for the entirety of the show. It was an entire pleasure from our side to have this discussion with you on different important topics. And of course, as our show says, we go beyond borders and we discuss issues that are extremely pertinent to the world. And we did this today as well. I just want to end with this one point. Ethics are extremely important when it comes to anything, when it comes to agreements or signing and then adhering to those agreements, or when it comes to ethical journalism. Follow that and the world might be a better place to live in. Allah Hafiz.